This is the Sports Tech Playbook, a podcast series on sports technology hosted by Daoud of Compliance Standards and Julien Blin of Upside Global. Thank you for listening.
All right, welcome back to the Upside Playbook, the show where we decode the tech shaping the future of sports. I'm your host, Daoud of Compliance Standards, and like you, I'm here to learn. And as always, I'm joined with Julien Blin, sports tech analyst and founder of Upside Global. So, in our last episode, the first one of this series, if you want, we looked at how tariffs and global trade tensions are hitting the sports tech sector, from rising costs to supply chain headaches, etc. If you missed it, definitely go back and listen to it. It sets sort of the stage for what we're diving into today. Because this week, we're taking you inside the locker room, literally and figuratively, to explore how elite teams actually vet sports tech startups. With thousands of startups fighting for attention, most, in fact, never make it past the first meeting. So Julien's going to walk us through the real selection process, from product demos and pilot programs to internal decision-making and budget reviews. We'll talk about what startups get wrong, what they get right, and how to build long-term trust with the teams. Whether you're pitching your first team or trying to scale across leagues, this episode is your playbook. So let's get started. Welcome, Julien. How are you today?
I'm great. Yeah, it's great to be back on your show. So thank you, David.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let's start with the vetting framework, if you will. Of course, the standard first question is, what are the first things pro teams look for when a sports tech startup pitches them, for instance?
Well, so first of all, I would, before I even answer the question, I would just distinguish, in my opinion, there's two types of teams, right? And two types of practitioners, meaning head of performance, head strength coach, who are looking to adopt those technologies. So you have on one hand, you've got the very advanced teams, right? The veterans, the guys that have experience, and they don't necessarily jump on all the shiny objects. What they usually do, let's say take a head of performance, right? They define their goals. And if the goal is, for example, to reduce injuries, to improve sleep of the athletes, right? Or to maybe improve the recovery time, then what they do is they go and find modalities. Modalities meaning they go and try to identify technologies that can help to improve sleep, that can help them to cut injuries, right? And then from there, they go and try to reach out to the vendors who they believe can help them reach those goals, right? So that's the first camp. The second camp is what I call let's say take a young practitioner, right? They get reached out to by companies all the time. They say, yes, sure, I'd love to learn more about the product. And that's what I call like jumping on the latest and all the shiny objects, right? There's not necessarily a goal of what they want to do with it, but they just want to go and try to adopt everything that I think is cool, or because maybe some other companies told them about a vendor and they said, you got to check this out, right? So that you have to really distinguish the two camps, okay? Now, you asked me, what is the vetting process? Typically, so there are some teams that would tell you, Mr. Vendor, hey, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you if there is no studies. Some teams are very strict on that. They say, look, I want to make sure that you send over the studies because they want to make sure they're using something that's validated and scientifically proven. So that's the way that some teams work. Other teams, they don't really care about studies. And they say, look, they'll invite the vendor on a call to have them present a technology, right, for example, or even do a live meeting, an on-site meeting, have them do usually a demo of what the product, what it does, what are the benefits for the team, whether it's to cut injuries or, flag some potential complication with athletes. So they have a first meeting. They give them an overview of the technology. They get a demo. Usually that's how it works. Then if they pass that first stage, right, the vendor and the team, what they would do is they would frame what's called a pilot, right? A pilot where they would define the duration, right? Could be for a month, 2 months, 3 months, right? Then they have to define, is it going to be a paid pilot or is it going to be a free pilot, right? And then, so once they do that, sometimes, so they start a pilot, right? And they have some check-in as they go for the pilot to see how things are going, what they're learning. Sometimes they do workshops as well, right? So they kind of stop, kind of reconvene and see what works, what doesn't, what they've learned. And then at the end of the pilot, if everything is conclusive, then that's where they would put together a contract with the vendor and the teams so that they can define the price, right? The duration of the contract. They have clauses. They define, things like customer support, what the types of level of customer support they're going to get. Or what if, if there's additional cost, you have to customize the platform. What is the cost? That type of things. But typically, that's how the process works. But there's one big element I didn't mention is whenever they are in contact with a vendor, what the team usually do, they reach out to their peers, right? And say, have you heard of this company? What are your thoughts, right? Are they any good? What are your feedback? And that's how they usually try to get their feedback. And that's the reason why on our Upside platform, we literally build a section where the teams can write reviews of products. They can check out reviews of other products from other teams. So that's the reason why we build these types of mechanism to digitalize all the reviews on our platform. That makes sense.
So if I understand what you're saying here, the process is not really ad hoc, where somebody would just make a call to a company and try to get a relationship going. It's if I understood, there is something called proof of concept results. In other words, some of it would be getting the teams getting to hear from peers in terms of references.
Yeah.
In terms of getting initial traction. But I think in the beginning, you did talk about relationship driven. In other words,
Yeah.
a team knows what technology they want.
Yeah.
They sort of go through their relationship to reach out to the companies that are actually producing those
That's right.
systems. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So either they know what they want and then they go reach out and find the companies, or the vendors reach out to them and they don't really have a goal in mind, but there's, okay, sure, we'll check it out. We'll have a meeting with you guys. Tell us what you've got. What's your product? What does it do for us? So there's two ways. Either they are proactive and they reach out to the vendors because they have goals on what they want to do, or they let the vendors come to them and then they have a meeting, right? And then they have to vet them and they can reach out to their peers. And if they want to, they can do a pilot and all that stuff.
Yeah, and so that's what you mentioned, I think, last time, that if you are a startup or a company that has great products, but you don't have the relationships, you don't know how to go through the vetting channels and processes, you don't know how to get into peer reviews for your product review, it's extremely difficult to make it.
And that depends on what's the background of the founder, right? Some vendors, they have an advantage because they come from the world of sports. They used to work for teams. They
have relationships, yeah.
That's right. And then some others do not. They don't have any relationship. They're just an engineer and they build a cool product. But they have to build a relationship. They have to literally maybe go on LinkedIn, go to conferences, talk to teams, whoever team they can talk to. And that's the other way to do it. But that's also how vendors do it as well.
Yeah. And so I would imagine that, coaching and medical staff probably are key players in the process, in the decision maker. Are they actually themselves what I would consider gatekeepers, influencers, or decision makers?
So usually you've got three types of people, right, in an organization, depending on also the product. If the products are very medical oriented, decision makers would be like like the medical staff, director of, medical team doctors or head of rehab, right? And so you have to distinguish between what I call the performance medical staff, which is comprised of director of performance, athlete trainers, physical therapists, team doctors, right? And then you've got the coaching staff, head coaches, assistant coaches, right? And then, but they care about other types of technology, which is probably more around tactical organization, as opposed to the performance medical staff, which is more interested in technology to help them reduce injuries, improve load management, improve the sleep, rehab, and that kind of stuff, right? And then you've got what I call the data innovation guys, like the director of research, sports scientists, data analysts, who are more interested in obviously data analysis, research. How do we do that? What tools do we use? And then the last, you've got what I call operation administrations, right? So these are more like GMs, director of operations, sports tech analysts, who are more interested in what's in the front office, as far as what are the communication tools that I should use to improve the efficiency of my team, or what are the tools that I can use to scout athletes and players for the next draft. That's usually the key people that you need to talk to. But at the very end, you need what's called a champion, meaning who believes in and use the product. So you need an internal champion inside the team, you also need to get what I call the budget gatekeeper, someone who's obviously is responsible for the budget, because you have the gatekeeper for the budget, but you also have the users, and sometimes they're not all the same people, right? A GM might be a gatekeeper for the budget, but then the user is going to be the head of performance, right? Who's going to use the product every day. And of course, you've got a financial decision maker, the person who's going to make the decision. Sometimes it's the head of department, the GM, they write the check. And so you have to convince them to really, write the, take the decision in your favor, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So just imagine for a moment I am one of those startups that really doesn't have the opportunity to pitch to a sports team, but thinks that I have a fantastic product, right?
Yeah.
Can you walk me through a typical journey of let's say a startup that's trying to work with a team, and then that is from first contact to that very crucial moment, which is the demo time. I'm going to say that whatever your answer is going to be, it's going to be probably very well appreciated by the thousands of startups that are out there. So how does that work from the moment a company works its pitch platform, if you will, from that first contact to the demo?
So if you have, you build a product, right? You have zero connection with sports and with any teams. What I would recommend they do, what they usually do is they would go to a conference, right? When there's a lot of teams attending, they may have a booth, right? So if they have a booth, they go and, have the team stop by the booth, get a demo, they exchange business cards. And at that point, they follow up, right? By email or phone, over the phone, and they try to get that next call, right? You say, look, we had a meeting at this conference. You are interested. I'm just following up to jump on the call with you, or even do an on-site meeting to show you a demo. And at that point, if the team is still interested, right, they would discuss the frame of a pilot, for example, if the team wants to do a pilot. And then, like I said, after that, you do the pilot for a period of time. You kind of pause and see what works, what doesn't work, what they've learned. And then at the end of the pilot, if the team wants to move forward, then they would have to get into some sort of an agreement. So that's the first use case. If you go to a conference, you have no connection with any teams. There's also a lot of people reach out to teams on LinkedIn. I'm not a big fan of that. I think there's so many people reaching out to teams on LinkedIn, and it's almost like if you don't know the individual or the team, it's almost 99% of the time the team is not going to get back to you, unless even if you have an amazing technology, it's just very difficult. The last thing is what I've seen vendors do is they use what I call the mentors, advisors, people who have relationship with existing teams. And those advisors, mentors will reach out to the team and say, hey, look, there's this great company. I would love for you, the team, to get in touch with them. So they facilitate, they make an introduction. And quite frankly, that's probably the easiest way to get the attention of the teams and get them to talk to you. Because the world of elite sport, we talked about this the last time, it's one of the hardest industry to break into, because those practitioners of the teams, right, they're highly solicited and they're extremely busy, right? They're on the field every single day, taking care of players, traveling. So it's very, very difficult to get their attention. So the only way you're going to get their attention is, is to have kind of a way in. If someone in your network knows the team very well, or if you go and meet someone at the conference and the person, is really interested in what you're doing, but even then, there's no guarantee they're going to follow up with you, right? So we have to be persistent again and again and again, or have a way to get in through one of your connection.
Yeah, and I completely echo your sentiment about LinkedIn. I mean, it's a great tool for keeping relationships going, of course, but personally, I get bombarded all the time with solicitations of service that are not even in my area of interest, to be honest with you. So I totally understand that. Just a quick clarification. You mentioned in your response that conferences are, interesting venues. And I know you have one coming up. Can you tell us a bit about it?
So we have a number of events, right? This year we've got about 4 events. The next one is we are organizing a VIP dinner at the NBA Summer League in Las Vegas, where all the NBA team will be. And it will be on July 15 at the Wynn Hotel. We have a ballroom, and we're going to have about half of the NBA team, about 5 vendors to present. And it's at the Wynn Hotel. It's on the 15th. And then after that, it's in Las Vegas. After that, we have our big annual summit taking place in Sunrise at the top stadium. I can't say the name of the stadium just yet because we have an agreement with the team, but it's our annual summit. We expect 300 sports executive, about 50 plus teams, right? So NBA, NFL, MLS, MLB, lots of teams, about 30 exhibitors, 10 panel discussions, 2 keynotes, and a 1 hour speed dating session. That's on October 23rd in Sunrise, Florida, next to Miami. And then we have 2 other dinners, VIP dinners, one at the MLS Symposium, which is in Fort Lauderdale. We're not too far from where you are. It's a dinner very similar to the dinner we're doing at the Summer League. It's in mid-July. And then we have also a VIP dinner at the MLB meetings, where we expect at least half of the MLB teams. And that's in Orlando in December as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So a lot of sports tech activity in Florida, from what I see. That's
Correct,
awesome. Anyone can attend these conferences if they want to purchase tickets, or is it restrained and limited to specific folks?
So for the dinners, it's invite only. We don't sell tickets online. If you want to be a sponsor, present as a company, you can do that. You can reach out to us or to me. But as far as the Miami Summit, people can buy tickets. That's no problem. If they go to the website, Sports Tech Conference, I think .co, you can just go there and buy the tickets.
Going back to the discussion, when you talk about a good tech demo, what does that mean for an elite team? What is it that impresses them? Is it unique products? Is it products that solve problems that they couldn't solve elsewhere? Nowadays, given, of course, the proliferation of probably tech startups, which ones or how these companies are going to determine that their product is going to be desirable and vis-a-vis sort of the elite teams?
Well, so if you take an example of a product that's supposed to, to flag potential injuries, right? You want to do first of all, you want to show through the demo that the product can do what it's supposed to do or what you said it would do, right? So, you ideally want to do the demo at the stadium, right? At their facility. Maybe they'll have the trainer along with a player, right? To use the product, whether it's sensors or wearables that they use. You want to do it there and show, right, that the technology works. Sometimes there's complications as far as connectivity. You have to connect the device to Wi-Fi or Bluetooth on your laptop, but that shouldn't be too hard. And really, you have to show that the product works and that there's very clear understanding of, what does it do, what does it measure, and how that data can really help the teams, like I said, to really maybe flag injuries or to improve load management or improve the rehabilitation process. But whatever you said the device would do, one, the demo has to work, and I've seen vendors really do demos, but they don't work sometimes. And 2, you really have to demonstrate that this technology, this product can help a team, whatever the goal is. Like I said, reduce injuries, improve management, fasten the rehab process. But whatever you said it would do, you have to show it and demonstrate that it actually does what you said it would do. So, and that's it. So it needs to work at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, and in a business like this, you have one-time opportunity. If you miss it and you don't have those sort of tight relationships.
And I'll give an example, right? I was talking to this one vendor, and I said, well, how did it go? Because the guy said, well, we met like 3 NFL teams. And then I checked back with the one NFL team he mentioned we met, and the guy from the NFL said the demo didn't work. The demo didn't work. So you said you met the team, and then the team told me it never worked. Yes. But of course, the vendor never told me this.
Yes. They of course, companies are and folks are very careful how to frame their successes and failures with the third-party analysts, because they know you straddle between the industry, the end users, of course, whatever they say. Any other common mistakes that you can think of that startups tend to make during a product demo, for example?
Or they would say, look, this product can do this or can measure these metrics, and it doesn't. Or
over-promising.
Over-promising. And the biggest thing the teams are very big on is the team. Are they reactive? Are they nice to work with? Are they good to work with? Do they understand what we do? Do they understand the workflow? And sometimes when those guys, the startup CEOs, or they don't come from the world of sports, it's hard for them to understand what they're going through and what they're doing every single day. But if you do come from the world of sports or you're a former trainer, you get it right away. And I think you're earn the respect of those teams if you come from the same industry. And that's a big plus. And not every single startup can have that luxury, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You talked earlier about the pilot programs that companies or teams, undergo. A couple of questions come to mind. Are the companies involved, the startup companies involved, monetize a pilot program, or are they a pro bono thing meant to essentially go through a proof of concept? And how long does a pilot program usually take? And thirdly, what's KPIs are measurements and metrics that these teams are using to assess the effectiveness of a program?
Well, first of all, I've seen startups. There's two ways. Some of the stuff they charge. It's a paid pilot, and sometimes it's a free pilot. So it really depends on.
Okay.
There's not one answer, right? It really depends. And I think, what was your other question? Sorry.
Well, the other question is, what are the metrics that they use, and the length of those programs? I'm assuming it's probably all over the map. But what's the average, if you were to guess, 2, 3, 4, 5 months?
I'll be less than that. Usually it's between 1 to 3 months, typically, because you can pretty quickly demonstrate that the technology works. So I think 1 month is usually fine. Sometimes you go up to 3 months.
Okay.
But the one thing I would say is typically when you do a pilot, right, you have to start small and integrate lightly. For example, you have to try to avoid trying to overhaul a team system. Like you're not trying to break everything and so you got to use this. But the goal is really to fit into existing routines, right, to reduce friction. So typically when you do a pilot, you can provide, for example, like a mobile first access, like sample dashboards or CSV exports for the data that you track. Or you can also integrate if needed, right? You can use some interoperable standards like API access, with, for example, GPS for Catapult or whatever, or even like an AMS platform, right? We talked like those dashboards that they use. So you have to be able to integrate with the existing API. You should not try to, to replace what they have, but just really fit in. And as far as communication, right? When you do a pilot, usually they have like weekly emails with usage updates. They have biweekly sync up with the team. They have midpoint reviews, right, with early insights, and then you have to go do like a final pilot debrief and Q&A, right? Sometimes they give them reports at the end of the pilots because that's useful for them. Even though they may not continue and move forward, they still want to give them something that brings value to them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So take us, if you will, to sort of the decision making center. And you talked earlier about the various stakeholders, right? I think you cited the GM, the performance director, I think they have data teams. You have other people as well. What happens if there are or when there are disagreements inside the organization about the startup's value or the fit? Let's say you show up with a fantastic device. This is a mouse by an Air mouse. You show up with a product like this. Some people like it. The feedback is good. It does what it says. You leave as a startup manager or executive. What happens in that circle of decision makers when some pull this way or the other ones pull this way?
Well, first of all, sometimes you've got within the same team, right? You have people who want to use certain vendors and they do not want to use other vendors, or they're using a current vendor. They don't want to switch.
I can
so
imagine.
There are sometimes politics. I'm not gonna lie. So there are the people who want to get a change, want to see change, and they use some other things. So if, like, say, for example, your boss is very big believer in one vendor, you're not gonna go against that because your job could be in jeopardy. And I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, when you go and bring a new technology, the goal also should be to communicate on why we're using it, so everybody understand the value of it. And sometimes because those teams operate in value in silo, there's no communication. So when at the end of the day, everybody's like, okay, well, I didn't even know you guys were using this. And when it comes to do a tech audit and everybody's on board because they didn't know, you didn't communicate on the value and what you were tracking, that's a problem, right? But at the end of the day, everybody has to kind of agree and understand that we're looking to adopt the technology. So you need to get agreement from obviously the end user, right? Whether it's a head of performance or the trainer, you also have to get agreement from the GM because the GM usually write the checks They manage the budgets, and you may also have an agreement with other departments. Maybe the head of rehab, different department would also could benefit from that. So I would say this: the more people, the more end users are going to be using the technology, the higher the chance you're going to have to get this technology adopted. Because if you only have one guy in one department, and there's it's going to be less of appealing, right, for the team to adopt it. But that happens as well.
Yeah, and you certainly. I know you're dealing mostly with pro teams, which in which case the GM, as you said, is the guy who sort of signs the check, and has the huge probably impact on deciding where things go. But I'm assuming, because these are professional teams with well-structured, hierarchy, etc., that the GM cannot impose his views. I mean, you know how they say the buck stops here. Even though the buck stops here financially, the decision has to be one that the rest of the team, the rest of the stakeholders, tend to agree.
So the GM is the one that's going to rely on the guy on his team, the head of performance, who's going to be using the product, right? You might have an opinion, but at the end of the day, the end user has to be comfortable with that decision, right? Yeah. I haven't really seen occasions where the GM is going to try to dictate a technology. Usually it's come from below. The end user, the head of performance, is going to reach out to the GM and say, "Hey, I need this." Gotcha. And then, the GM is going to say, "Okay, that makes sense. I'll go for it. You can go ahead and budget it."
Yes. So from a go-to-market strategy, if you will, if I were like a startup, my target focus is not necessarily the GM, because the GM may be sort of the big leader, the top leader. At the end of the day, it's a bottom-up decision making, and I need to focus on those guys at at the bottom or below anyway, the GM.
I would say not always. Here's why. I have seen vendors that are literally targeting the GMs purposely because they know sometimes their technology is very expensive. So they literally go to the GM, and if the guy's going to have to write a check for $100,000 a year, they know that the end user is going to say, "No, I'm not paying $100,000. So what they do is they literally go to the GM, try to get him to get his buy-in, so that the practitioners, almost they are forced sometimes. Of course, they have to agree, but they try and use those tricks and leverage a GM, and they will tell you, "I don't want to talk to anybody else but the GM," because they know it's crazy expensive, and they know if they convince the GM, the practitioner will have sometimes no choice but to say yes. And I've seen that, especially when the technology is very expensive. Does it make sense?
100%. So 100%. I think sort of they're relying on the GM to convince the rest of the organization to test the product and potentially like it if it makes sense, because it's a high ticket item.
But it's almost like they're forcing their way down to the practitioners, because they know that sometimes it's not fair, because the practitioner might say, "I don't really see the value to this." And they convince the GM and say, "Yeah, we got to go and buy," for whatever reason. He believes in it. But sometimes it's almost like when you try to go to your boss and you try to force a decision. You see what I mean? It's not always, I think, the best approach to do it, but sometimes vendors do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense. It does make sense, which means that for a startup company, the best approach would be a multi-segment, targeting strategy. I mean, you have to go, especially if your product is cheap enough. Yes, you could go to the working folks. If your product is very expensive, you really need to reach out to the CXO level, to the folks at the very high
right. At the end of the day, even if the head of performance likes your product, he's gonna have to go and talk to a GM, because it's a big, big
expense. Yeah.
So you have no choice. Sometimes some teams they allow for you to spend like $10,000 on a credit card, because if it's below a certain amount, you can just swipe it. You don't have to go and ask the GM for approval. So that's something else that you can do as well.
One group we haven't really addressed is really the athletes. At the end of the day, it all deals about the athlete themselves, right? How much influence do they have on the technologies that get adopted in their field?
It depends. Sometimes I've seen there's one, for example, you an example, right? There, a top European soccer team from Spain. I won't tell you who that is. Very well known. The head coach has so much trust from the players, but in exchange for him to have them do whatever he wants, he also give them power. For example, if there was occasions where I've heard from the practitioners that if a player say no, I don't want to use this, the doctor or whatever, the practitioner cannot say anything because he gave them, he got the agreement that they'll do whatever, not whatever it takes, but he give them power in exchange of getting something from them. So that's kind of an extreme case. But other times, especially in teams where some player makes a lot of money, sometimes the player's like, look, I'm not going to use this. And there's nothing much you can do with it. So you have to get the buy-in, especially on those big teams with guys who make millions and millions of dollars. You have to get their buy-in because otherwise it's not going to work, right? But what I do see also is young guys, let's say a young NBA rookie who trying to make it to the league, or a young guy from a soccer academy, they'll do whatever it takes. If you say you got to wear this device, it's going to help you, they'll do it because they want to make the team. So, but the veteran guy, the veteran player, sometimes you know what? I've been in this league long enough. I make a lot of money. I don't have to use this thing. Leave me alone. I mean, as well, right?
Yeah, and I'm assuming it depends on sort of the usage model of the product, right? I mean, if the product is going to be used exclusively by the medical staff for their medical assessments, it would be, I would imagine, very different in terms of how the athletes would provide feedback, right? The athletes would provide feedback if they have to wear that product on the field, right?
Well, the big thing is we always talk about in this field, like the product needs to fit the workflow, the routine. If it disrupts the routine, if they have to spend 3, 4, 5 more, 10 minutes more doing what they usually do, they have to sit down, in front of a camera or something that's going to make them wait, stay longer. That's what sometimes products fail because it's not practical and doesn't fit the workflow. So that's another thing too. If it's complicated, if it's something non-invasive that they just can just wear it, a ring that tracks your sleep, no big deal, right? Even though sometimes they don't want you to track what they're doing, at their house. But I think if it's easy enough, non-invasive, it's fine. If it's too complicated, if it requires to get an additional staff members to do an additional work, that's where sometimes things fail. So that's part of the workflow, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That completely makes sense, right? Now, this is probably a question that most of the startup companies would be listening very carefully to your answer. And it deals with budgets, right? So if you were to guess or give approximation, what kind of budgets do elite teams typically allocate for new tech each season? And of course, it depends on the type of team, but go ahead, tell me what you think.
It depends on the leagues, right? So we track budgets because on our platform, the team tell us their budgets annually for performance tech. So when you're talking about performance, meaning like GPS, cardio, VR training, sleep trackers, if you look at MLS teams, Major League Soccer, right, in the US, it's typically between 75 to 100,000 a year. If you're talking about NBA teams, right, it's usually between 200 to $300,000 a year. I'm not even talking about like medical devices, which is usually a separate budget sometimes, but it's usually between 200 and 300,000 for performance technology for NBA team. NFL, probably about the same range. So that's usually the range, right, of the different types of budgets.
And I think you alluded to this last time when you talked about the different tiers or types of pricing models. I think you spoke about subscription versus a one-time fee versus licensing. Does any of that affect the startup's chances to succeed in a company? Is it which model tends to be favored by teams? Paying upfront, regardless of the price, paying on a monthly basis, on a 6 months basis, having paying for a license. How does that affect startups' chances there?
It depends. Some teams like to pay everything up front. They don't have to swipe a credit card every single month because they're going to forget. It's just too busy. So sometimes CapEx, right, paying up front is what the teams like to do. Sometimes if it's a big expense, right, let's say 1,000, 2,000 a month, then they're okay to break down the price and have a leasing model when they pay every month. So it also depends on what's the total fee you have to pay. One of the nice thing about having a leasing model, sometimes the software breaks, the machine breaks, They can replace it anytime. So I would say it depends. Some teams like to pay monthly, annually. Some other teams like to pay upfront capex. So I wouldn't say it's a one size fit everything, because it really depends on the team, the budget, what they like to do. So
Yeah, absolutely. So you're dealing with a number of startups, and I know most of the discussions that we're having right now seems to be focused on startups, but
yeah,
let's continue on that for a moment. For companies that want to succeed in this business, how important is the founder and team dynamics in gaining traction or buy-in from a sports organization? I mean, is the founder of the company a major personality, and they need to coordinate all of that with a team to build a dynamic that helps them keep going?
from my perspective, the management team, it is the most important thing. I've come across some companies in the past, great technology, but the founding team did not listen. They would not take directions. They were very bad at follow-ups. And that to me is a big red flag. I had many conversations with teams. Sometimes it happens when you have some young, graduate from top, Ivy League schools. They think they can do everything they want. They're very smart. Well, that's one thing. But guess what? If you don't have the experience, if you're not good at customer support, if you don't understand the space, if you don't have credentials working in sports, it's not going to work, right? Sometimes I've seen founders very aggressive, literally like harassing teams all the time, and that does not fly very well. Trust me, it doesn't go well with teams because they're extremely busy. And sometimes, I always tell people, or I always tell a team, I would not recommend a vendor to you if I have a problem with them. If it's going to be a problem for me, it's going to be a problem for you down the road. And I don't want you to tell me afterwards, hey, Julien, you introduced to this vendor, but that's not working out. They're difficult. They're not responsive. And like, to me, like, having a very good customer success team is probably one of the most important things that you need to have on your side as a vendor.
Yeah, very interesting. It always boils down to the go-to market, right? At the end of the
Yeah.
day, to your point, if you're extremely aggressive, that doesn't work with any industry, right? I mean, people don't
It's
have time.
relationships, right? Relationships.
Yeah.
And, one of my friends used to tell me, we worked together at Samsung, and he said, people are going to work with you if they like you. That's kind of a funny thing to say, but if they like you as a person, that's half the battle. Of course, you need to have a good product, but if they like you as a person, that's, like I said, you're well positioned to get them as a customer. But your goal should not be to make a sale right away. Your goal should be, as a vendor, to really try to help the team as much as possible. Try to be helpful. And I think many times vendors are so quick to try to make a sale, but they don't understand in the world of elite sports, relationship driven. It's not necessarily about the sales. It's just relationships.
Yeah. So just a question that came to mind. So if you are a company, or if you're a startup that has actually money coming from venture capital,
Yeah.
from equity folks, to what extent these guys from the equity business, are engaged in the process? I mean, you would think that if, I'm going to give you some money, that part of that money has to be earmarked for a go-to market strategy that makes sense, that's vetted, analyzed. Not here's the money exclusively for the technology,
Yeah.
or to hire engineers. How does that work in reality?
So I would say 10 years ago, most of the investors, the VCs, would say, here's the money, here's the check.
Just go get me more money. Yeah.
Now we're seeing the emergence of what we call like operational VCs. They do more than just giving you a check. They want to help you hire experts, sales guys, engineers, product guys. They're much more helpful in the way beyond the capital. And sometimes some of those investors have a relationship with teams, so they help them connect with potential customers. So I think the new generation of VCs investors are much more operational, which is a good thing. Of course, sometimes they want to kind of maybe take better control, and they don't want to tell them what to do. But I think having investors to go beyond just writing a check, I think it's better, as long as they know what they're doing and it's not going to go against the interest of the startup.
Yeah, and it's a brilliant thought, because at the end of the day, I witnessed in the past a lot of these investors essentially handing over checks
Yeah.
to companies that really didn't have the strategy pretty clear already,
Yeah.
right? They had just the broad idea, maybe the product per se, but to your point, if you don't have a way to get into the market, you're stalling. You're not going to get anywhere. And so I'm pretty happy to hear that there are, I think, what you called it, what, operational VCs?
That's right. Yeah. And they have a relationship with team that's even better in that case. But yeah, look, like I said, it's tough to get into the industry. It's one of the hardest industry, to my knowledge, out there because
Yeah.
it's so difficult to get their attention, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm seeing the same sort of process taking place or shift taking place in the environmental services, the
Yeah.
recycling business. Investors are more keen on or keener on getting personally involved
Yeah.
in helping the company holding its hands, not merely transferring financial resources without ensuring that they have the way to get into the market for sure. So that's probably one of the things that you've seen change over the past 5 years. Anything else that that you see has impacted? I know right now when we ask questions to companies, are they using, for example, AI to do procurement? That's virtually almost everyone really does that.
Yeah.
Anything else that comes to mind that's affecting the vetting process, the way the companies go to market, et cetera, that's changed over the past few years?
Well, I think, like I said, well, so studies, right? The importance of doing studies, research, right, to really be validated by top publications, especially in the world of performance, where you make lots of big claims as far as reducing injuries, improving the load. So today, based on research we've done, less than 30% of the sports tech startups, performance startups, have done research and studies. But research have shown that if you've done published studies, your chance of getting more capital and more customers increase significantly. So, but not everybody is, capable of doing research, know how to do research. And not everybody has money to do that. So, but I think it's becoming more and more important to really be competitive in the market, the importance of research, and it gives you credibility in the eyes of the teams, right? You mentioned the importance of AI. I mean, now, and every single companies and startups and sports and tech say they have some AI capabilities, but I think there's a lot of people who make big claims on what the AI can do,
Yeah,
especially as far as predicting injuries, which I think is a very gray area. And you cannot predict like a contact injury. If you're going to get hit in the face, well, yeah, you can't predict that, right? So the importance of AI is important, but at the same time, really vetting what the AI does and what it can do. It's like back in 2006 when I was an IDC analyst, right? And I was covering, mobile advertising. Every single company I talked to said we have a mobile advertising platform, but
yeah,
what easy, really? Sometimes it's very basic, right? So, but in my opinion, having three things as a CEO of a sports tech company, things like, do you come from the world of sports? Number one. Number two, do you have scientific validation? Do you publish studies? Number three, do you have traction with team, like real traction beyond the pilots? I think that will make you stand out from the crowd, right? As a startup CEO. And can you execute?
yeah,
Because sometimes some vendors are very bad at executing, right? They just don't know, they're not very efficient. And you got to
yeah.
move fast because with a team, like you said, you got one shot. And if your demo doesn't work, if you cannot deliver on what you said you would do, then they're going to move on to the next vendor, and that's it. They're gone.
Yeah, and so those are what you would consider, advice for early stage founders trying to break into the elite sports. Anything else that you can add to that? Just imagine I'm one of them. You've said a lot during the podcast. Great
Yeah.
stuff. If you were to boil it down to, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 points, what would be sort of the priorities for me as a founder trying to break into the elite sport?
Well, you have to ideally. Well, first of all, your product needs to be solid and validated, meaning
Speak for
show
itself.
that
Yes,
there's
it's
science behind it. Number one. Number two, the best way to break into the world of elite sport is you have to find your way in, whether you get introduced by an advisor or mentor or someone, because trying to get through LinkedIn and stuff like that, it's very difficult. I mean, let's just face it, right? It's very difficult. And number three, like, you need to have financial backing. Like, if you're going to work and you're part of a team and you have a runway for 6 months, right, and you're going to go and disappear and go away, you're not going to be able to support the team anymore. It's a big risk, right? So you have to raise money, and enough money. You have to be good at raising as well, right? And not every CEO is good at raising money. Sometimes they're good at building products. Sometimes they're good at selling. But raising money is a different beast, right? So, and you have to grow. You have to scale fast. You have to win customers. You have to show traction. And it goes back to connections, right? Do you have the right people who have the right connection to move fast, to gain market share, right? It's very competitive, right? There's a lot of guys in the same sector who wants to get that customer just like you. So you have to move fast. And again, it's based on relationship, right? If a sales guy has worked with one team for like 10 years, guess what? Most likely that one team is going to go with this one guy, this sales guy, because they worked together many, many times before. So, it's all those things, right? It's like I said, it's being in a sports tech industry. It's just like working in a league, playing in a league as a team. It's extremely competitive. So you have to find a way to win, get market share, right? Go all the way to the top. But it's tough. It's tough to keep the lights on, keep raising money, keep getting customers, because there's another vendor next to you who's waiting to get the same customer they're trying to chase. So it's difficult, but it's that's the way it is.
Yeah, and of course the ball game is, no pun intended, is very different for established big brands, right? I just read somewhere that Sony, for example, just had a deal with the NHL for some technology, relationship or partnership. The doors or the path is easier for these types of companies because of the brand. Yeah,
it's easier. However, team wants to work with emerging companies who have cutting edge technologies, and many times those big brands, big companies, they cannot move as fast. They're not as innovative. They're not taking as many risks, and that's what startups do. They can come up with a technology breakthrough. Nobody can do it, not the big guys. And that's why sometimes those big brands, they try to acquire them because they've got something that they can do. They can move as fast. They can build something very disruptive. So anyway, and the teams want to find the next, groundbreaking technology that they can use to have an edge, right, over other teams. So, it's a catch-22, but there's always pros and cons being a big company or being a small, agile, cutting-edge, innovative company.
I think I would love to see a checklist of what, from you, of what startup companies need to, founders in particular and their team need to pay attention to. That would be a fantastic roadmap. But I think with that, Julien, I think we covered everything. Anything else we missed?
No, I mean, in fact, we actually wrote a post, an analysis on the top things you need to do to succeed as a sports tech company. So maybe I'll send it to you and you can check it out.
Perfect. What's next for you? We're going to talk again in a couple of weeks, but in the meantime,
I'm flying to Miami. I've got to catch up with some teams over there, and I'm going to the PHATS, which is the NHL Strength Coach Conference, and I'm flying to Europe to catch up with teams as well. So that's kind of
wonderful. Well, make sure you bring your hat and a lot of water in Miami. It's getting hot. And until our next talk, thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk to you in 2 weeks from now.
That sounds great. Thank you, David. Always great to be on your show. Thank you.